the FBI asked me if I would create a standalone FBI 80-hour close protection school, which I did. And yeah, I was lucky enough to do that. I was just in the right place, right time type of deal. I was able to train not only FBI agents, like hundreds, but then the other three little agencies that weren't part of DHS got a hold of it and were like, hey, can we get in there? So that was DEA, ATF, US Marshals. I trained all of them. And I think there were some CIA folks also that came through. And that was great. That led me to Gavin DeBecker. And then, I did 9 years with him.
Today, we're talking with James Hamilton from the Hamilton Security Group. James, how are you today?
I'm great, Matt. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much for joining us at the Faith-Based Security Network, where a lot of what we do and a lot of our members are focused in on security, not only the security of their churches, but their loved ones as well, taking an active role in their own destiny when it comes to safety and security. And I know that that's a subject that's very close to your heart. So I would ask you, just give us a little bit of background. What makes you an expert on personal security?
Well, thanks for the question. I think on the professional side, what makes me a nationally recognized expert is I've been doing this exact thing for more than 33 years. And what that means is I've dedicated my professional life to personal security, keeping people safe from violence. And that started, in 1992 as a deputy sheriff and led to the FBI, which led to Gavin DeBecker and Associates, the premier executive protection firm in America, and then led to me starting my own firm. But during that time, I've done nothing but that very thing. And so that's from training, consultation, instruction, actually doing protection, living that world. And a lot of people don't have that. A lot of people might have a lot of years in and grade or whatever, but they don't have specificity to one exact area. And that's where I stayed. And, I think that's reflective in the way I speak, the way I communicate that, and the way I write about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've really enjoyed reading some of the articles that are posted on your website, hamiltonsecuritygroup.com. If you'd like to go check that out, you can also see some interviews with James that he's done with the BBC, Good Morning America, other news outlets where he's been a featured guest speaking about particular events or just security in general. So let's talk about the FBI for just a moment. You got into that and you were I'm going to get this title right, Supervisory Special Agent there, and you ended up helping create a particular school. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, I got into the Bureau in 97. I kind of followed a path that a lot of people do, which is local law enforcement into the FBI. And so I think that might be new to some of your listeners. They might think that only FBI agents are lawyers or accountants, though we had a lot of those. During the 90s, they kind of went back to hiring. I was hired under something called the Diversified Program, which really was like military or police. I got real lucky. It's the odds of getting in are they're pretty crazy hard. And I was in a room full of about 50 people who were all extremely qualified, doctors, like literally doctors, NASA astronaut. We had some really impressive people. And I was just a deputy sheriff from Columbia, South Carolina. But the thing I really could do is I understood, violence. I understood kind of putting people in prison. I understood courage, all those things, because I'd been tested on the streets. So I was lucky enough to get in the Bureau and then, went to a field office. Like that's kind of how it works, the pipeline. You get assigned randomly to a field office. And then I got into the SWAT program. Every field office has a SWAT team. I was lucky enough to get on the team there. I was assigned to a drug squad, and then I also got on the SWAT team. So I was doing SWAT, and I was working narcotics cases, which was fantastic. And then kind of in the interim of that, within the FBI, they do some close protection for, justices and the attorney general and the FBI director. So I was asked to do some of that work, and I really liked it. I really resonated with protecting another human being. And that led me to apply for one of the only two protective details in the FBI. One of them's the FBI director's detail, and I got selected for that. I got transferred to DC in 2004, did some on-the-job training type stuff, and then I was put on the detail, like working shift. And I did that for 4 years, 24/7. It was with Director Bob Mueller. And then after that, I got promoted to a supervisory special agent and was promoted down to Quantico at Hogan's Alley, or the tactical training unit, where I was teaching new agents tactics. And then after about 3 years of that, I got transferred to the overseas survival program, which was really a fantastic situation because we were training agents and analysts to deploy overseas, most of the time unarmed. So that was great. I loved doing that school. And then in the interim of that, the FBI asked me if I would create a standalone FBI 80-hour close protection school, which I did. And yeah, I was lucky enough to do that. I was just in the right place, right time type of deal. I was able to train not only FBI agents, like hundreds, but then the other three little agencies that weren't part of DHS got a hold of it and were like, hey, can we get in there? So that was DEA, ATF, U.S. Marshals. I trained all of them. And I think there were some CIA folks also that came through. And that was great. And that led me to Gavin DeBecker. And then, I did 9 years with him.
So in your career, either the FBI or with Gavin DeBecker Associates, can you share with us some instances where security and the willingness to pay attention ahead of time might have played into keeping somebody safe?
Yeah, it's everything. And I didn't really understand that. That's a great question. As I just described, we chose protective people from the SWAT world. So they were very type A, right? SWAT is special weapons and tactics. That's what we were all about, like shoot, move, and communicate, like that, speed, surprise, violence of action. Like that was my world. And, I really thought that I would just shoot my way out of any problem. I had not really done a deep dive or studied assassination or attempted assassination to the level that I have now today sitting in front of you. And now what I do know is that very rarely, if ever, does a firearm preemptively stop an assassination. In fact, it just doesn't happen, right? And what really does happen is using time and distance to effectively move the principal quickly out of the situation. As evident by the Reagan shooting, fully surrounded by armed individuals, agents and officers, and none of them fired a round. John Hinckley did all of the shooting, and Jerry Parr moved Reagan to the car with Tim McCarthy. He's got the door open, and that's what saved his life. Was quick, immediate thinking, preemptively staging everything, and that's everything. So if you look at all of it, security, kind of big picture, and then look at it very minutely. If you think about a church, for instance, if you have effective security training and people looking outbound and looking for anomalies and having a plan, and then they see it, then they can do something because they're set up to do that. That is far better than a guy walks in with a gun and you're like, oh my God, now what do we do? Well, that's way too reactive and way too late. I think that's everything. It's all the preemptive stuff, and the only way you get preemptive is if you're thinking about it. If you're creating a strategy that will see it, stop it, before it actually starts, and then if it does start, okay, quickly take it out and stop it. There's so many examples. I've had it in my own life on protective details where just from the way we planned it, we avoided so much, and that's really how to do it properly, is just avoid the situation. And if you can't, then you can't. Then you got to get mad dog mean.
I love that, mad dog mean. So one of my mentors once said that the best gunfight to ever get in is the one that you can keep from happening.
Yeah.
And so that idea of being prepared, seeing things coming, moving, so that you don't have to deal with those sort of things, I think is missed by some churches.
Mm-hmm.
Again, churches are getting a lot better and taking security much more seriously. But even just recently, I was visiting with some people from a church not too far away from me. I'll leave it vague here. And we were talking about church security instances, and they were saying, well, we got some guys with guns. If something happens, we'll be ready. Like, okay, well, what are you doing now to prepare? Well, and it was just never this focus on, we have to have a plan. We have to think through things that might happen and try to mitigate them before they ever get there.
Right.
So as we're talking about things from the church security standpoint, what are some bits of advice that you would give to your average church to help prevent some of these incidences before ever really having to respond to them, to head them off before they ever happen?
Yeah, great question. And I apologize. When I was kind of talking about my background, I got involved in church protection in about 2011. We were going to a kind of a non-denominational, where they do altar calls every Sunday. And I went down and, got baptized, gave my life to Christ, like the whole thing. And then they found out that I had this like executive protection background. They said, hey, would you do protection for our pastor. I'm like, sure. Right. So the way that church was set up was you had outbound security and you had inner diamond security just for the pastor. And so, my role was to protect him, cover an evac, not get involved in something that was happening out in the crowd. But to answer your question very pointedly, when a church has decided to go armed, which that's a big decision, and hopefully they've considered the liability, they've considered the lawsuit, all of it. The most important thing, not only and I'm going to say things that are super important. One is that the people carrying those guns need to be good. They need to be well qualified. I'm not talking about some one-off CCW class from some state school because, that's like shooting, from a boat into the ocean. Like it's super easy. I'm talking about real firearms training from the holster, how they carry, not in a bag or a shoulder holster or an ankle gun. None of this nonsense. Like real training from how they carry every day at that or every Sunday at real target environments with multiple no shoots, like not just one paper target. No. You have multiple no shoots around them. So they're making good hits on the right target. But what's single most important thing is they have to be positioned effectively. Okay. That meaning physically they have to be at a post that would be most apt to be in that encounter. What I mean by that is I call it the portals. We watch what I call the load, right? So when we have people coming through our 3 doors, I have people at those 3 entrances watching for that anomaly. Now, they don't always, give themselves away, but if you look at like Sutherland Springs, Texas, or you look at other church shootings where a guy gets out in full tack gear with a long gun, okay, man, that's it. It's on. We want to prevent that from getting inside this building. And the best way to do that is position people outbound. So they're at the portals watching the load or they're in the parking lot, right? Not inside drinking coffee in the sanctuary and then they see it. Well, now it's too late, right? So that's the most important thing is that these folks are positioned effectively. If they're positioned in the right spot, okay, now they're in a good place to potentially do what needs to be done with regards to that firearm piece. But I think that's what gets missed a lot. When I go to churches that aren't my own, I'm always, because I can't turn it off, I'm always looking, hey, how are the guys positioned, right? And invariably what I find is they're inside the sanctuary, back to the door, watching the crowd. Okay, well, then you're going to have to get involved in this thing with all these people in front of you, and good luck, because that's a very difficult shooting situation now. Right. But if you're outbound and you're looking for those anomalies, because you'll see those tells. Most of the time there's a tell. You'll see the weapon. If they're carrying concealed, you'll see the bulge if you're looking. But man, I think that's the biggest thing is the positioning and the training, right? Positioning and the training.
So what kind of services do you offer to a church or let's say even a Christian school, something like that, where they could bring you in as an expert? What kind of things can you help them determine?
I do an assessment of the actual worship service and just to see, like, where are your gaps? What first of all, what's your strategy? What are y'all doing? What do I see? Where are the gaps in the coverage? And then help to, kind of shore those gaps up. Invariably, I'm probably going to, recommend some type of police presence. I always think that's a good idea. Off-duty officers. Why? Because they have, uniform, they have authority, they have, a lot of really good things that we can't get on the private side. But yeah, I will do an assessment of a worship service, give, consultation to them on best ways to make it a little bit safer. And I also do training for protective teams on, okay, if let's say they're doing pastor coverage, and I often will ask on the assessment, what are you protecting? And if they say everything, well, does that mean the pastor gets a protective detail and the people? I really need to understand that. And if we're doing that, if we're protecting the pastor, then they're going to get EP training. They're going to get, what do I do? How do I space myself? How do I use time and distance effectively to keep this person safe and not rely on a firearm? How do I hard point? Where is my cover and evac location? How do I make the pulpit, safer? I mean, all those things. And then if we're not doing pastor protection, then it's perimeter security, getting eyes out there. I like to train everybody with eyes out there. And what I mean by that is parking attendants, greeters, ushers, everybody that's looking. I want to train them in situational awareness, behavioral anomalies, so that they can, be a force multiplier. And when they see something, trust in their intuition. And by the way, that's a very difficult thing in churches. It's very, very difficult, because what happens a lot of times is people are like, well, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be judgmental. God would look down on me. And you got to get over that. Okay. You're not being judgmental. Intuition is something about your safety. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about race, sex. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about, the guy, whatever color he is. We're talking about the behavioral anomaly that your intuition said, hey, wait a minute, there's something here. Okay, now what do I do? Okay, tell somebody, tell the safety team, or tell the cop, right? And then we can start to do further investigation. But yeah, that's the services I offer. So it's training and consultation to make houses of worship safer.
What do you think is the most pressing threat against churches in particular? What things do people need to be keeping their eyes open for?
That's a really good question. Two things. What is going on in your community? How accepting are they of violence? Meaning, is it okay? Are people okay? In your wherever, whatever city or state you're living in, are people okay with firebombing a building? Is there general support for that? Right? Okay, well, that's a problem. Or, God forbid, if it happens, firebombing of a church or graffitiing a church. How responsive are they? Does the community care? Or does the community get up in arms like, we're not going to have this here? And you're supported by the community leaders, police, sheriff, all those things. Because right now, I'm seeing more and more anger toward churches specifically and synagogues. And I say, you've got to be very aware that this is happening, right? First of all. And then secondly is, use your money wisely. I think a lot of churches use their money improperly because we don't have, I don't know about you, but a lot of these churches, it's finite. They only have so much money to dedicate to safety and security. And so, okay, here's a good example. They're like in a rush. We're going to get cameras. Okay. Who's watching the cameras? What do you mean? Well, they're just recording. Okay, so these are evidentiary cameras in case you get vandalized. Well, okay. I mean, maybe you'll catch somebody with that, maybe you won't. But to me, if you're going to spend the money, let's spend some money on things that might actually prevent violence. Better locks, better ballistic glass, or at least tinted glass. Medical supplies, things that we are actually going to use. Because again, it's finite, and I think we need to be really, really good stewards of that very little amount of money that we're getting. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with cameras. Like if you have a person watching the cameras during service, okay, now that's great. They can let us know, hey, this is going on outbound. That's awesome. But a lot of times I don't see that. I see them just using them, as a record, and then it gets dumped after 30 days or whatever. So yeah, I think those are some things to be thinking about, and just really pay attention. Like one thing I love about your network, for people that hopefully they're all taking advantage of it, is just the intel that this faith-based security network is putting out. They're giving intel across the community, across the nation, and it's letting us know, okay, patterns, because patterns will develop that way, right? Copycat is a real thing. You have one church shooting, you have two more. That's a real thing, right? So just things like that, super, super aware. Obviously, we got to be, and that's biblical. We have to be vigilant. There's so much in the Bible about that.
One of the great tools of cameras is that you can have one person with eyes in multiple locations instead of having to have somebody with eyes
Yep.
physically in those locations.
Yep.
But they do no good, again, as you said, if you're not watching them, if they're simply recording their evidence after the fact. So I feel like a lot of churches want to, especially I see it with schools, but with churches as well, we want to pay a little bit of money to fix the problem so that this never happens. But there seems to be a balance between having those skills with eyes and hands on the ground, because response time in an emergency, even in wonderful situations, is still 3 or 4 minutes,
Yeah.
plus the lag time between when something starts and somebody actually calls 911, plus the time from the 911 dispatcher then calling the cops. There can be several minutes there that you really have to take care of things yourself.
Yeah.
So what is the best way to prepare for that? Let's just say a domestic incident spills over at a church. We're having to respond to it. What are some tips for a security or a safety team to be able to survive and thrive in that time between the call for 911 and the time that emergency responders actually show up?
Yes, that what we call the triage, just triaging the time. And for me, First of all, I like to use safety, not security, just because a safety team doesn't have to have a license for the most part, right? If I start saying they're a security team, then I might have to get state licensing involved. But when I train volunteers, the very first thing I tell them is you do not have any like no requirement to go get involved in this thing. If it's dangerous and you feel like I'm in danger, do not get involved in this thing. Ask people to get away from it, call 911, we have radios, get on the radio. But first of all, know that. And then second of all, if you are going to get involved, go with numbers, right? Get some people with you, right? And I tell my team, hands, waist, surrounding area. Hands, waist, surrounding area. That's what we're looking at. So you gave the example of a domestic. All right, we have a domestic in the sanctuary. This couple's going at it. Hands, waist, surrounding area. Do they have a weapon? No, they do not. Okay, now I can get a little closer. Then I'm going to tell the people fore and aft, meaning in the front, the pew in front of them and the pew behind them, or we just have rows of chairs. Okay, you all get out of here. All right, this is inappropriate. We're going to deal with it. We have police en route. You all get away from them right now. Right. And then they're like, what's going on? Well, we're not going to tolerate this. You're being inappropriate. We're going to ask you to go outside. We're getting these people away from you because I don't know what you're going to do. Right. And then we're going to kind of, you don't want to triangulate them in a way in which they don't get a way out. You want to give them a way out. Right. So you want to have a contact cover type concept, but give this couple, hey, there's the door. We need you to leave. Let's take it in the hallway. Right. But you can't triangulate them. You know how it is. I mean, if you give them nowhere out, they're going to fight. Okay, so I want to make sure I'm giving them that out. And then hands, waist, around an area. I'm like, hey, we need to go now. You're being inappropriate. We need to go now, right? And what I always tell the pastor is, hey, if we're getting involved in something, a lot of times like medical, have the pastor lead, and just tell them, hey, everybody get your heads down and pray. Okay, like on a medical. That's the best thing to do because everybody's a daggum doctor, right, in a medical, but they're not doctors, right? And you're like in the way, like get out of the way. So I love for pastors, just get on the radio or the PA. Everybody put your heads down. Let's pray for what's going on here. Or pray for this couple who's going through something and everyone get their heads down. And that way we can work and we can get them out of there. But that to me is a big thing. Hands, waist, surrounding area. If they have a weapon, and that's a different story. Now we may have to escalate, right? Or just get away from it or go at it, depending on your capability. But that to me is the biggest thing. You're just trying to, buy yourself some time, give them some dignity, like, hey, sir, let's take this outside and talk about it. I've been there, that type of deal. That's why, de-escalation training is really good, if churches can do that, or just do some verbal judo. How do you talk to people? Because I think if we put, and I love doing this, I think it's a really good idea if you're running a team and you're doing training, like put down your training, like the hours. And so let's say you do 10 hours of training in a year. And what are your 10 hours? Like look at them. Let's say you've got 2 hours medical and 8 hours firearms. Well, I would say your percentages are off, right? Based on what happens. I mean, I don't know what your church, but I deal with medical almost every week, right? So that to me is the priority. Or, interpersonal ability, like talking to people. We do that every single service. We don't shoot anybody, right? And so make sure your percentages are kind of in line with your reality. That's the big thing for me. I mean, I did a synagogue one time and they were carrying like long guns. I'm like, whoa. And this was in the U.S., and they're kitted out, M4, Rock River Arms. I mean, they're ready to go, which interesting. But I'm like, hey, what's your medical situation? And they're like, well, we call 911. I'm like, whoa. Okay, well, you're going to be dealing medical, my friend, before you start, ripping an M4 on a guy. But I think that's super important. And I also think it's really smart. Less lethal for sure. I love less lethal. I can talk for hours about tasers. But if you're going to kind of be equipped with all this stuff, I really think, you need to think about some type of restraint. You need to have an ability. If you're going to make a citizen's arrest for something, if that thing escalates and they're not there yet, and you're going to decide to make that thing, you got to do it with something that works, like handcuffs. You cannot do it. I've seen people try to use flex cuffs, and those things are not great. I mean, I have them, but everyone know what I mean by it. They like plastic or rope flex cuffs, and they're okay with a compliant person, but they are not great on somebody that does not want to get handcuffed. So I would tell people to really think about what you're wearing on your belt, and handcuffs might be prudent, depending on your situation, especially if you're in a area where your response is 20 minutes. You might have to, and citizens arrest are they're relatively legal. I mean, they are legal all over the U.S. and that might be what has to happen.
until somebody can arrive,
Yeah.
an authority can arrive and take over that situation.
Yeah, because you don't want to hold a guy down. If you just hold a guy down for what, 30 minutes, my God, good luck. I've tried that. I mean, it's somebody's gonna get hurt, and that could be bad for everybody.
Well, James, how can people learn more about your group and your skills? How do they get in contact with you?
Yeah, you can go on my website. There's a contact form, and I have a number of services I offer. You can click on that and just click on it, notify me, and I'll contact you straight away. I have a YouTube channel. It's called Safety Seconds with James, and it's just really quick videos because I know people have a short attention span. Just, hey, how do I stay safe? Going to the grocery store or on an airplane, or you name it, all these little life circumstances. I have an Instagram account. I'm on LinkedIn, but just reach out to me on the website and I'll get back to you. I believe in ridiculous responsiveness. So that's, I get back to you as soon as I possibly can, because I don't want to waste your most precious commodity, which is your time. And I promise never to do that.
Well, wonderful. And I will say that your website is worth spending some time on.
Thank you.
Be sure you check out his articles. There's some wonderful information in there.
Thank
Well,
you.
James, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you so much for supporting Faith-Based Security Network.
Appreciate you, Matt. Thank you, buddy.